Welcome to Performance Car Lounge, where each week we speak with enthusiasts selling their beloved performance cars. This week we speak with the seller of a Mitsubishi GTO. Welcome everybody to the Performance Car Lounge podcast. Believe it or not, this is the 10th episode of the podcast. So if you have been enjoying the podcasts and you'd like to be notified next time a podcast is released, please subscribe. That would really help me, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on one of the podcast streaming services. If you subscribe, that would really help me out. And today we've got a really interesting car to discuss. It's a technological tour de force from Japan in the 90s. This car was a twin turbo V6. It had four-wheel steering. It was all-wheel drive. It had active aerodynamics with an adjustable front and rear wing. And it had electronically controlled suspension and an electronically valved exhaust. So at the time in 1990, when this car was released, these were features that often didn't appear on cars for 20, 25 years. So the car we're discussing today is the Mitsubishi GTO. And joining us today, I have Jason, who is the seller of very interesting 1996 Mitsubishi GTO. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Thanks, Stuart.
So, Jason, can you tell us all what led you to become interested in the GTO?
Well, for a lot of the things that you just said, actually. So it was a car that was pretty much ahead of its time. The performance numbers and all of the things that it offered, like all-wheel drive, a six-speed gearbox, which was not that common in the 90s. And I was actually at the time upgrading from a WRX. So I really liked that WRX, but it didn't quite have the looks or the power that the GTO offered.
Yeah, it certainly has that exotic supercar look about it. And I think it took maybe a little bit of inspiration from Ferraris of the era and the time. And yeah, as you're saying, six-speed manual at that time was not what every car had. Like I think the R32 Skylines at that stage had a five-speed box in them. And this car was really developed to, as a flagship for Mitsubishi to show what they could do. And while it was, a very fast Grand Tourer, and the GT standing for Gran Turismo Omologato, it wasn't really their performance car because they had the Evos for that type of thing, didn't they?
Yeah, I guess the Evos came a little bit later.
Yeah.
But they definitely became the performance vehicle after the GTO. The GTO, even though it's just a two-door still, much larger car than the Evos. Very wide, very low, and definitely very eye-catching. So when I selected the GTO, I was cross-shopping against other vehicles like Supra and Skylines. And the GTO just seemed to have a little bit extra to it, with the six-speed gearbox, the all-wheel drive, the rear and centre limited slip diffs. Just got incredible traction. Yeah, and for some reason at the time, it was also a little bit cheaper. And the Skylines are already starting to take off.
Yeah.
Back in 2007.
So that's a really interesting point. I don't understand why the GTO sort of hasn't appreciated as much as the Supras and the Skylines and even the NSXs. It was sort of competing with those halo cars. When it was released in 1990, the recommended retail price was approximately $90,000 Australian, and by the time it got to the end of its run in 2000, the price had gone up to I think it was about roughly $118,000.
Yeah.
And in today's money, if you take inflation into account, that's a $216,000 car.
Yeah, I know, right?
That you can now buy, and we'll get to the price later, but you can buy for what I would say is a bargain price, especially compared to the price of the Skylines and the Supras and the NSXs out there.
Definitely.
I remember back in the day, I have, always read car magazines, and through my research, I believe the car was launched at the 1989 Tokyo Motor Show. Well, that wasn't really launched. They had a concept car which they called the Mitsubishi HSR, which somehow stands for highly sophisticated transport research. So they missed a T in there or something like that. But yeah, that's when it was flagged to the public and then released in 1990. So I believe that you purchased the car in 2007. Can you tell us about your purchase journey there?
Yeah, that's right. So I guess I started shopping and comparing cars online sort of mid to late 2007 and ended up flying to Sydney to inspect some GTOs.
And you're from Tasmania, so
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a dedicated trip.
Yeah. So I came back home and made my final decision and flew back probably a month later and purchased the GTO. I got in late evening in Sydney, purchased the car, and started driving back towards Tasmania. So it was a long night. I actually slept in the car.
Oh wow. That must have been such an, you would have had such anticipation leading up to finally taking delivery of this car. I'm sure by the sound of it, you did a lot of research and you looked at a lot of cars. And what was that drive like from Sydney back to Tassie? Did you have a chance to stretch its legs a bit, or did you take it really easy because you're worried about damaging it?
I may have stretched its legs a little bit,
Yeah.
but once it got to about 3 in the morning and there was no one around, certainly tested it out a little bit, and then eventually pulled over into a truck stop and slept there for a few hours and woke up early and continued to Melbourne. And it was actually the morning after the grand final. So I had this really sweet run around Melbourne at 6
Yeah.
a.m. Everybody was still in bed after the grand final.
Nice.
Yeah,
And it would get along. So it's powered by a 3-liter twin turbo V6. It's the Mitsubishi 6G7 unit, which is used in a lot of cars
yeah,
in the Mitsubishi stable. So from that perspective, it's sort of, I guess, tried and tested. But being the twin turbo version, it obviously puts out a hell of a lot more power. The Japanese quoted it at 206 kilowatts,
yes.
but I think that it was putting out a fair bit more than that. So this car was marketed under different names around the world, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. So in Australia, it was officially sold as the 3000 GT, and also in the US as the 3000 GT, but also the Dodge Stealth.
Yeah, the rest of the world, like Europe, got it as well, and it was marketed everywhere else except Japan as the 3000 GT and America as the Dodge Stealth, where I believe that was an exercise really in badge engineering, where it was a collaborative effort between Chrysler and Mitsubishi and Dodge did a little bit of exterior styling to the car, but the mechanicals
Yes,
remained unchanged. And
yes,
that car was quoted as putting out 239 kilowatts, so substantially more than what the Japanese were quoting. And that's all down to that gentleman's agreement. I'm sure
correct.
many listeners are aware. If you're not aware, that was an agreement where the manufacturers, I guess, wanted to allay the fears of the Japanese government that there wasn't going to be a super car power war where we were going to see ever escalating power figures. We sort of went through the same thing in Australia a little bit as well. With I remember the Monaros coming under a bit of flack for being able to go so fast.
Yes,
Um, so yeah, the manufacturers, they didn't legislate it. They just had an agreement where they said we're going to cap the power outputs at 206 kilowatts, but the cars were obviously putting out a lot more. And I think that was evidence. You could see the torque figures climbing and climbing over the years, but the maximum power figure was
exactly.
staying the same.
It was just suspicious that the Supra, Skyline, and GTO all had the same power on paper to two decimal places.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but definitely, yeah, it was the same power in reality as the US market version.
And it was interesting. I think they didn't use the GTO name outside of Japan for a couple of reasons. Obviously, in America, they had the Pontiac GTO, so maybe that name was
Correct.
taken. But I
Yeah.
think they're also worried about getting a bit of flack for using such an evocative, nameplate on a Japanese car.
Yeah.
And I guess this was a bit of a turning point for Japan because in the late 80s, Japan's economy was really booming and they were investing money into building these, what I would effectively call supercars of the 90s, the Skylines and the Supras, the NSXs and the GTO. So yeah, they shied away from using the GTO nameplate outside of Japan. So just speaking of the US, Dodge actually had arranged to use a Dodge Stealth in the 1991 Indianapolis 500 as a pace car. And the Auto Workers Union rejected it purely because it was Japanese. So again, I think there was for want of a better term, a bit of racism against Japanese cars around that time. And
Okay.
because the union rejected it, they used a prototype Dodge Viper as the pace car in the race instead. But what they had also arranged to do was give the winner of the race a replica of the pace car. So the winner of the race was a fellow by the name of Rick Mears, who won the Indianapolis 500, and he did receive a replica Dodge Stealth pace car for winning the race. And in America, they did actually sell that replica car to customers as well. So every Performance Car Lounge podcast has a bit of a car nerd nugget in it. So there's another one for your fascinating dinner chat next time you're at a dinner party.
Yep.
So with your car, your model's actually the GTO MR, which stands for Mitsubishi Racing. And it had a few changes made to it for a couple of reasons. Probably primarily, we were just speaking about how Japan had that great economy going in the late 80s and into the early 90s. But then the Japanese economic bubble burst and the yen dropped, and they had to build these cars cheaper to continue to sell them at the same price. So they did pull a lot of features out of them. But what it also translated to was a lighter car as well. So this was a fairly heavy car.
Correct.
Like what you've essentially got is a lightweight twin turbo version of the car that has had the four wheel steering removed.
Yep.
It's got did it have the ABS removed?
No, well, actually, I believe it might have been optional. So fortunately, mine came with the ABS unit.
Yeah, right.
That's the only nanny system that it has, though. So there's no traction control or anything like that.
I've got to say that is so refreshing. I've got a car that I bought earlier this year, and when you get into cars these days, they beep at you.
Yeah.
It's tugging at the steering wheel. Turning the traction control off is, a multi-step process. There's
Yep.
just so many things you've got to do to get the car to the way that you want it to drive it.
Yep.
And a car like your GTO, you just get into it, and your right foot is the traction control, and you
Correct.
take responsibility for driving the car, which I love.
Very analog. We got the hydraulic steering, and yeah, definitely a nice car. Definitely that 90s feel.
Yeah, and the other features that made the MR a bit more lightweight were they removed the electronically controlled suspension as well, I think.
Yes.
And also the active aero, which
Yes.
I guess if you're looking to buy one of these cars today, these to me stand out as all things that have massive potential to go wrong.
Yes.
And if you had to fix it, would be very costly to do. So, and probably don't add a lot to, a mountain drive experience as well.
No. From what I understand, the adjustable suspension wasn't that big a deal. Basically, it was soft or hard. There was sort of no sort of tuning of it, and it wasn't that fantastic. I mean, one of the first things aftermarket upgrade is to change the suspension out anyway. And so mine, for instance, has the KW Variant 3 coilovers in it, which are very nice. Adjustable ride height, adjustable damping and rebound. That was a very nice upgrade for it. And it came, and another thing that was deleted from the MR version was the exhaust, the adjustable exhaust.
Oh, okay.
Mine came with that classic huge exhaust system on it that you see on Japanese cars of that era.
Yes.
Sounds fantastic. Definitely gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, not all of it good, I imagine, but you can
No,
manage that.
no, definitely not all good.
And I think it's was very wise of you to invest in good quality coilovers because it's a fast car and it's a heavy car, and cheap coilovers I don't think would do the job. So
No,
you've
no,
done the right
definitely
thing
not.
there.
And the KW Variant 3s are also one that are known for their comfortable ride if you want it. And it definitely, you can tune it so it is nice for a long trip, keeping that sort of GT nature about the car.
And what else have you changed in the car? I believe you've got some aftermarket wheels on it.
No, well, those are the wheels that came with it. So they're Ray's Engineering race wheels.
Oh, okay.
So they're lightweight forged wheels. They had a little bit of gutter rash on them when I got the car,
Yeah.
but I've had them completely redone. I did look at how much it would cost to get those wheels, and it was just insane.
Yeah.
So I got those redone. And when you take them off and look, you can see that they're actually manufactured in 1996 as well.
So period correct,
Yeah.
lightweight, strong wheels. Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent.
Uh, it did come with an aftermarket aero kit. So it has a different spoiler on the back, and it also had a spoiler on the front. The spoiler on the front was pretty much unworkable around Tasmania.
Yeah.
Literally driving off the Spirit of Tasmania, the first thing that happened was scrape.
That was your first modification.
No, I just deleted that, but kept the one on the back. It's actually, I think, much nicer than the original spoiler.
Well, I've had a look at the photos of the car, and for anybody who's listening to this as a podcast, I'll have all of the photos on the performancecarlounge.com.au website, so you can have a look at the car. But speaking of the rear wing, it looks very similar to the VR4 rear wing, which is called the Combat wing, I believe. Is it one of those, or is it sort of a similar looking wing?
It's no, it's a different shape. Well, it sits up probably about the same height as that spoiler, but it is a different shape. It has a more rounded shape to it. I think I like both of those spoilers, but before that 99 upgrade spoiler, yeah, wasn't a huge fan of that. That was the only thing I didn't like on the car really. So that was probably what swung me towards that particular car as well, is that it came with that wing. I'm trying to remember who manufactured that wing, but I can't remember now. But so other than the suspension though, I haven't done anything to modify the vehicle at all.
Yeah, I think you're saying that you've got a Greedy turbo timer on it as
Correct.
well. Did it come from Japan with that?
Yes. Yep. That's right.
Yeah, you often get a few surprises. I've just purchased a car at auction in Japan, and a GTO is coming over on the boat. So while I think it's fairly stock, you never really know until it arrives. So I might have
Yeah.
some surprises in store.
Yep. Yeah. So over the years, it's been pretty rock solid. So the only thing that I've had to do is the timing belts, which were due at 100,000 kilometres, and a water pump, which started leaking a little bit. So yeah, it's been and the brake master cylinder.
And do you remember how many Ks roughly the car had on it when you bought it in 2007?
Yeah, so it was 88,000 kilometres,
Oh, so you haven't. And how many are on it now? There's only
115
14,
at the moment.
115. So it doesn't sound like it's been a daily driver for you,
No.
your ownership. No.
No, so I've always had another vehicle that's my daily driver. This has just been special occasions, going for a cruise. I'm also lucky enough to have a second sports car as well, so it's not always the one I select to go
Okay.
for a longer drive.
What's the second sports car?
Well, BMW 135,
Oh, nice.
so another turbo six
Six.
cylinder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Rear wheel drive for that one.
yes, yes,
So I think, yeah, the GTO is constant all-wheel drive,
correct.
but predominantly rear-wheel drive. I think it's 55% of the drive goes to the rear wheels and 45 goes to the front.
Yep.
So how do you find, what's the difference between driving those cars? Like, are they completely different driving experiences? Like, what do you like about each of the cars? What are the main features?
The GTO definitely feels like a sports car when you're sitting in it because it's so low. The low center of gravity means that it can corner a bit faster than the BMW, which is a more upright vehicle. So obviously the 135 is just a one series that they made quite a few different versions of that's had a massive engine shoved in it.
Yes.
Um, the the engine in the 135 is very good, I have to admit, but it is in the GTO as well. The GTO just has no hesitation. It high gearing and it does like to rev, so you can sit in one gear a lot of the time when you're on a windy road. And the GTO is speed limited, which is probably a good thing.
Is that still got the Japanese 180k speed limiter on it? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it gets there pretty quickly.
It's interesting. I've never driven a GTO, and I would love to, but I have driven a few turbo cars of that era, and I've driven a lot of modern cars as well. And one thing I would say is that when those cars are on boost and that turbo is kicked in, I think they accelerate as quick or quicker than anything on sale or any
Yeah,
petrol engine on sale today.
yeah.
Like their acceleration is phenomenal. It's just about managing the rev range, making sure you're keeping it in the the sweet spot as much as you can.
Yeah, well, being a twin turbo, that kind of helps a little bit too. They two smaller turbos instead of one big turbo means that it spools up nice and fast. There's not really much lag at all.
Yeah,
The 135 that I have is well known for having low down torque. So
yeah.
as comparison, there's not as much difference as you would think.
That
It's
I would
very
imagine.
close.
Yeah, that 135 could be fairly spiky to drive, I'd imagine, because it's a relatively short wheelbase and
Mm.
a lot of power going through the rear wheels. You'd know you're alive driving that sometimes, I think.
Definitely. And the N54 engine out of that too is identical to the M3 of the same
Same era.
era, just
Yeah.
detuned a little bit. So I've actually got the M3 tune on that one. So it's more like about 290 kilowatts,
Yeah. Okay.
which yeah is interesting in something that's light.
Yeah. And that car would, I guess, somewhat fly under the radar a little bit too, compared
Yeah.
to the GTO.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes the reason to take that car out instead because of the attention that you get in
And
the GTO.
and you've never been tempted to modify the GTO because with it being a very strong and reliable engine, I imagine that you could crank up the power with a few modifications fairly easily and reliably.
Yeah. I guess I'm just more into the GT nature of it. I have followed on the forums where people have got massive amounts of power out of them, and the engines are still pretty solid, surprisingly solid. You will see very high kilometer engines out there. If you look, especially on the US forums, there's a couple of 100,000 miles or more and still going strong. So it's, yeah, a good motor, that one.
Yeah, and it's mated to that six-speed get drag gearbox, so that's also known to be quite a reliable gearbox. So
Yes.
I guess for anybody who's considering buying this car, compared to the other cars of the era out there, your entry cost is quite cheap. And what you could do is, budget to spend a bit on some modifications if you were of a mindset of making it quicker.
Yes, for sure. Yep. A turbo upgrade. You can buy those off the shelf and put them on there. And you can wire in a ECU chip and yeah, just go for it. An air fuel ratio controller, and you're looking at some big power.
Yeah, and you can do it in style and comfort as
and
well.
and and the traction to be able to use that power as well. Interestingly, there's an aftermarket front limited slip diff as well. So you're driving a car with a lot of power that has three limited slip diffs in it.
Yeah.
Definitely puts down the traction.
Did you ever take it out on a track day, or has it just been used for those, mountain drives and Sunday drives?
For the mountain drive, so there's a lot of really nice roads in Tasmania for that sort of thing. You can get out onto the west coast or in the southwest and have these fantastic roads pretty much to yourself, and some lesser known roads as well where you can feel free to maybe open it up a little bit without fear of coming across other people.
I'm embarrassed to say that I have never been to Tasmania, but that is the number one reason why I want to go. I've seen all these videos and heard stories about these fantastic roads, and I've also heard, I don't know if it's true, that the policing of the roads and the speed cameras isn't as frequent as it is in, on the mainland.
If you know where to go, then yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. So what would be your top, if you had one drive, if I went to Tasmania or any of the listeners went to Tasmania, what would be the drive that you would suggest people do?
Probably from so there's a road that goes past Cradle Mountain. So if you go through an area called Sathana, there's a windy road down a valley and then up again. Some very challenging hairpin turns, some steep climbs, and then you get to the Cradle Mountain Road, which is a very high speed bit of road with some great cambered corners, and you can see the road for miles out in front of you. And so you can see if there's any traffic coming. And then from there, you head down the west coast, and there's a road called the Lake Plimsoll Road, which is very isolated, not a very old road, and it's fantastic. One of those combinations of twisty sections and then open high speed sections where you can see for miles, and very scenic as well. I used to work on the west coast, and so that used to be kind of my commute.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah.
I used to, yeah, working in a mine down there, and so I was working for 8 days and then come back up north of Tassie. And on my last day at work, I'd literally be like looking at my watch, going, "Oh, I'm going to be going soon. I'm looking forward to the drive."
Yeah. I
to
can
Montez.
completely understand that. It sounds like a terrific bit of road. I'll definitely drive it one day. Is it part of the Targa Tasmania route, or is that a different part of Tassie?
Yes, it is actually. It's part of the Targa Tasmania route. There must be at least half a dozen sections along there,
Yeah.
and I know that it's a bit of a favourite with the Targa drivers as well.
Yeah.
There's the special one very well known section is the 99 bends out of Queenstown, and it's literally bend after bend after bend, very hard on the brakes, but a whole lot of fun.
You're making it sound like my next holiday must be to Tasmania.
I
I just have to
recommend
convince
it.
my wife now.
Bring the skyline down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So what we've got here is supercar from the 90s, twin turbo V6, 6-speed manual, all-wheel drive, Grand Tourer. This
Yeah.
car's in what color do they call it? It's black.
Yeah, it was a black pearl, so it's a metallic black paint with where the metallic is actually a green color, and so in the sun you can just make out the green in the
Yeah.
background. Very, very nice.
All right. And why are you selling the car?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I seem to have accumulated a few vehicles, and I need to downsize the fleet and doing some renos on the house as well. So it'd be nice to sort of have some funds to do that. It's been a very hard decision to sell the car, and it will be very hard when it comes to time to hand over the keys, because there really isn't much else out there like it. No one makes vehicles like that anymore, particularly something with that much power and such a low center of gravity. Like you park next to an MX-5 or something like that, and you think they're low, and the bonnet is actually a little bit lower on the GTO than one of those things.
It is interesting. Through my research, I noticed that it looks like it's a big car with a lot of presence, but I think it's actually smaller in dimension, maybe even than the Supra. I'm not sure if that's right, but it's
Good
not a
question.
big. It's not necessarily a big car, but it's just got such presence, and I guess being aware of the weight, you know that it's got some good traction as well. Like the GTR designer was a fan of having weight in the R35 because
Correct.
it helps with the contact patch of the tire. And so I guess the not quite $1 million question, but how much are you looking for your Mitsubishi GTO?
Well, at the moment, it's 34,500. It's a good deal.
Yeah, that seems like a screaming bargain for a car that you have owned for what, the last 17 years. You've put very minimal Ks on. You've had no issues with it, and
No.
adjusted for inflation, if that car was sold today, it would be a $220,000 car.
Exactly. And I think that, well, I have the Japanese registration records here, and it looks like there was only one owner in Japan as well. So it's a two-owner vehicle, and it spent its life in Hachioichi, which is sort of on the western side of Tokyo,
Oh,
before it
okay.
came to Australia.
So not too far north, which
No,
which
and
is
not right on the coast either. So
yeah. So it's not going to be a rusty car, but I mean, over the 17 years that you've owned it, you'd have had to sort that out anyway if there was any issues.
oh yeah. So it's had its own place in the garage.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the Japanese cars you have to be careful with because they have a history of fiddling with the odometers, but a one owner car basically removes that risk. So whoever's buying your car can be very confident that the 115,000 Ks are genuine, which is actually very low for a car of that age.
Yeah.
All right, Jason. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us about the Mitsubishi GTO. I'm sure the new owner is going to love the car, and I think you'll miss it. And
Yes.
perhaps you'll be looking for a replacement to fill that gap sometime in the future.
Well, of course, talking about it and thinking about all the fun I've had with that car, maybe it won't be for sale soon. I'll be taking it off the market.
Yeah, well, so if anybody's interested, head to the Performance Car Lounge website. I'll have a full description of the car, the photos, a link to the ad, so you can get in touch with Jason to find out more. He sounds like he's negotiable on the price, but he also sounds like he's not desperate to let it go. So at that price, I think it's a bargain. So I wish you all the best of luck with the sale, Jason.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us at Performance Car Lounge. If you have a performance car with an interesting story that you are selling, contact us at performancecarlounge.com.au.